Díobh, welcome Fáilte Ilig to this Sinn Féin panel discussion on the economic benefits of a united Ireland. I'm joined by Michelle O'Neill, by Pearse Doherty and by Conor Murphy. And we're going to have a conversation over the next half an hour or so about Irish reunification, the economy and the clear economic benefit to Irish unity. So I'm going to start with you, Pearse, to kick us off and just to talk about the issue of affordability. You know, the old get out clause for those who would say, sure, we can't afford the 6 counties, we can't afford reunification. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Mary Lou, it's actually the opposite. It's not that we can't afford reunification. It's that no longer can people on no matter where they are on the island of Ireland, they can't afford partition and the cost of partition. And that's one of the things that we do in our discussion document on the benefits of Irish unity, the economic benefits of Irish unity. We trail through all of that, showing how, for example, the northeast of our island, Belfast and its hinterland, used to be the economic engine of the island of Ireland. 80% of all of our output came from that region before partition. What's happened since? It's been a complete and utter reversal, where economic activity is way behind what it would be in the south compared to the north. Nearly about a half as much of the economic activity in the north compared to the south. So we're just seeing the impacts of partition. But it's not just Sinn Féin in our discussion document that are making these cases. And we draw from a lot of research that's done by others. So you can look at the likes of the Hubner report, an international peer-reviewed report on modelling Irish unity, which talks about the benefits and the huge benefits, both north and south, to Irish reunification. We look at some of the work that was being done by the ESRI and others, and it's clear to be seen in all of the indicators, whether you look at output, whether you look at the type of jobs, the type of pay, whether you look at exports. You can see time and time again that the north has been badly served and has been detrimentally served as a result of partition. And actually, when you then fast forward to looking at the opportunities of Irish unity, you can see that it will create a stronger economy, a better economy. It has the potential to create better jobs, better paid jobs, and reduce a lot of this type of duplication that we have in terms of back-to-back delivery of services.
The other thing that's raised when people talk about affordability is the whole issue of the subvention and the 6 counties. And the argument goes along, well, whatever about that, Pearse Doherty, whatever about the benefits that might come in the future, what about that subvention? I mean, as we know, the Assembly, the Executive doesn't have tax raising or varying powers. We know that the fiscal levers are very limited. And we also know that we rely in a funding sense on the Barnard formula and money is coming from the centre. And of course, as Irish Republicans, we reject all of that. None of us is going to brag that it is a positive thing that we would be reliant on a subvention from anywhere. But nonetheless, Conor, you see that argument about the subvention and we can't afford it. Our document deals with that, doesn't it? It deals with it, I think, very comprehensively.
Yes, it does, because there is a myth around this, and it's usually used as the, stop this conversation on first base by just saying, where are we going to get £10 billion and we can't afford this? And reality is that what goes to make up that cost or that figure really is some of that is involved is essentially accountancy work that's done by the British government. So there are things scored against what they give to the north, which don't actually have any material benefit in the north. Things like the cost of military, cost of royal households and museums, and a range of other matters that they score against us, which actually don't benefit us. There's an underplaying of the amount of tax that is paid from the north, because big companies in the north, big supermarket chains, for instance, whose headquarters are in London, pay their corporation tax through there and don't pay them through Belfast. And so there is an estimation that has been done, and this has been done by people in government in the north, as well as by other economists, that puts that value anywhere between £2.5 and £6 billion. And so clearly, that's not to say that there is no additional money transferred, but it's to say that it isn't anywhere in the region of those who try to use it as a stick, if you like, to beat the unity argument. And clearly, the Pearse referred to some of the studies that have been done, which show the actual benefits in terms of full growth on the island. As he correctly identifies, the north is not only the worst economically performing region on the island, it's the worst economically performing region on both islands, and has been consistently. So in many ways, the potential growth of the north itself has been stifled, but that has contributed to a stifling of potential right across the island. And the Hubner study that Pearse referred to showed very clearly that the north would actually be the main beneficiary of reunification in terms of economic growth and added improvement in terms of our economic output. When these things have been used as a means to stifle debate, what our document does is it addresses that, and it opens up further conversations and gives people information to start to think again, well, if that is the case, and what is the long-term implications for the island? What are the resources on the island available to us? How can they be best used in the interests of all of the people who live on the island? And how can that breaking down of the barriers and the administrative and the legislative and the financial difficulties that barriers create for people? And we could see that particularly in around the Brexit debate, where the prospect of increased barriers are being seen very much first and foremost in economic terms. Well, the removal of those barriers completely, the reabsorption of Ireland as a new country into the European Union as a totality, then all of that really increases the potential of the country to be a much more self-sustaining, prosperous country, and one which can look after all of its citizens on the island.
And of course, the British Treasury is never hugely enthusiastic about giving us all of the data that we need to calculate these matters. Sure, they're not, Conor. I mean, you have a lot of dealings with them. They're not exactly into full transparency when we go knocking and looking for definitive figures to get to the bottom of the subvention argument. So that's been a real problem as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, and not only are they not keen on giving us that, they're clearly having a running battle with Scotland on the same issues as well, where they're not keen on letting people know. They like to spread this myth of the generosity of the British state to all of its loyal subjects who, in whatever part they live. And we had that issue during the week when the budget, when we eventually were told only now what the amount we have for the budget for next year, which we have to legislate for in the early spring. The Northern Ireland office were out spinning that we had got an extra 900 million, but when the sums were done, that didn't materialise at all. It was actually a standstill budget. It had put a pay freeze of public sector pay rises after all of the acknowledgement of the work of public sector people during the pandemic, and also they are in the process of spiriting away the replacement of EU funds which were promised to the executive in Belfast. They're in the process of trying to reduce that amount and retain the spending of that within Whitehall. So they're great people at sleight of hand and misinformation and spinning facts in a certain way. But what we have tried to do in this document is get to the real facts, to get to the accurate facts. And because you can only have an informed debate in relation to what our future is if we have accurate figures and facts, and that's what we've been trying to do.
And listen, I think it's really useful that this is Appendix 1 in that the document that we launched on the 20th of November, just last week, on the economic benefits of the United Ireland. It's available for all of you to read and to access on the Sinn Féin website, and I would encourage you. And the appendix is fascinating. And Pearse, just back to you, just to finish out on this one. Of course, it's not just the Treasury, the British Treasury in the north, and all of the political games around the subvention, but equally in the south, the dismissive argument, well, look, the subvention is enormous, we couldn't afford it. I mean, we establish in our document that 10 billion is not the figure, that it's considerably less than that, anything between 2.5 and 6 billion perhaps. It's still a considerable sum of money. Can the south afford that?
Of course they can, and for this reason. First of all, we don't argue that the South would just have to absorb the subvention. What the document actually does, and again drawn on economic research, is actually there's a bonanza here, mostly, as Conor said, for the North. 23.5 billion euro of GDP, economic output, activity. When you grow your economy by that amount, that means that more people are employed, more taxes are being paid, more revenue to the state, shrinks the deficit in the first instance. But that benefit isn't just solely to the north; it is also to the south as well. So there's a benefit all around. So, and that's going back to the initial stuff of, we can't afford partition. If partition is stifling economic growth north and south, partition is costing us. There's other issues that we're, dealing with in terms of the pandemic, and we know how partition and the lack of joined up dealing with that is costing us. But in terms of hard cash, in terms of economic activity, in terms of good, stable, decent paid jobs, partition costs us in this region. And, so we acknowledge that there's a subvention. The reason there's a subvention is because the North as an entity is not economically viable. This is the biggest argument that some that are opposed to Irish unity put forward, is that the North is such a basket case from an economic point of view that nobody could afford it bar the British. And that just doesn't stack up. Because the reason that the North is the way it is because of partition. And going back to my earlier comment, the North used to be the engine of economic activity. So the money, there is a subvention there, but some of that subvention wouldn't be applicable in United Ireland context. So, just to give you one example, Mary, part of that figure that they talk about is made up of 1.2 billion euro, or billion pounds sterling, 1.4 billion euro on British military. That's what they're saying that the North spends on British military. That's about the war efforts in Afghanistan, by decisions that are taken in London and all the rest. Now, who in their right mind believes that if there was a United Ireland next year or the year after, that we would be increasing our military expenditure by 150%? We spend 900 million at the minute in the state, in terms of our peacekeeping activities. Of course we wouldn't. So therefore, that type of money isn't required in a United Ireland context. And you have to go through it bit by bit. And that's what the document does. And that's what Appendix 1, as you said, outlines very clearly.
And I think that's really useful, because it's true, Michelle, isn't it? I mean, one of the frustrating things when you want to have the conversation about, the economy and reunification and what it's going to look like, and to make that point that Hubner and others have modelled and demonstrated the big boom that is available to us, very often it gets bogged down in that affordability subvention question. So I'm going to leave that for now, because I think we answer it actually really, really comprehensively in the document, and we've done so in this meeting. But Michelle, isn't it true to say that actually affordability is only one tiny part of the debate that we need to have the discussion? The bigger discussion is around the potential of a reunified Irish economy, and all-island economy, in terms of jobs and quality of jobs and earning potential and people's living circumstances and innovation and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, I think absolutely, Mary. I think people need to look at this as an opportunity for something better. We all know that partition has failed all of us right across this island equally. It hasn't discriminated. So there's an opportunity, I think, for something better. When you look and compare the point that Pearse made earlier around the differences north and south. So the standard of living in the north, much lower. More people are earning below the basic wage. All the things that are actually impacting people's everyday lives. Workers are earning less. All those things that are happening in the north. There's an opportunity for us to change that and actually make a more fair, coordinated and strategic sort of approach to economic development and to supporting individuals. So I think the opportunities that we have in front of us are there for us all to grab. And this is not just for Republicans or nationalists. This is for every single person who lives in this island. And of course, this is not just an economic argument. This is obviously a debate about inclusivity. When you look at Brexit, look at all the things that are happening right now. And I think that, that's been foisted upon the people in the north against our wishes. The majority of people rejected Brexit, but here we are because of partition, that we're being pulled out of the EU against our wishes. So we need to take back into our own hands, our own future. And I think this is the chance for people to engage in a very inclusive, open, upfront way around what can we do here that's better for every one of us? What can we do to carry forward the protections that are there now for individuals, particularly when it comes to identity, because that is obviously a very sensitive issue. So we need to paint the picture as Republicans of this open, inclusive Ireland, something that respects all identities, all traditions. And I think that's the conversation that certainly I want us to have. And we're up for that because we want to give assurances that what we're trying to create is that, as I said, an open and inclusive island where everybody feels valued and has their place. So there's conversation for us to be had, Mary Lou, I think, around all those things as well.
I mean, I suppose, Michelle, and of course you are now joint head of government, but previously a minister for health. I mean, one of the big issues, and this is a social and economic issue, a quality of life issue, a public service issue, is that question around the health service. I mean, I've never had a serious conversation with anyone from any political background on Irish unity that didn't go to either directly or indirectly to the issue of the health service and what it's going to look like. And it's frustrating, isn't it? Like, we've two broken systems on a partitioned island, and we need an Irish National Health Service, and that's really where we need to get to. I mean, just in your work in the executive, yourself and Conor and the team, it's frustrating, isn't it, when you can see what needs to happen, but not to have either the direct resources or the ability to have full control over how we change that for now. But I think Irish unity opens up that real opportunity for us, doesn't it?
It does indeed. I mean, just in its most simplest form, two health services on the island running back to back. I mean, that's just such a waste. And as you said yourself, both systems are broken. Whenever I was the health minister back a number of years ago, I brought forward a plan to transform the health service. There's a similar plan actually in terms of sláinte care. The two systems and the two programs were broadly similar. And I think that the huge opportunity that this again presents for us to transform what isn't working and actually make it into something better. And you're right, I think this is the question that many, many people ask whenever you discuss the issue of uniting Ireland, and they ask about the health service. What about the NHS? Our position is that there should be an Irish National Health Service, and that's certainly something that we would work to bring about every day. Healthcare free at the point of delivery for all citizens. That's absolutely that's what a good government would do. That's certainly what we would be wanting to do whenever we're in government, to develop that all island National Health Service. But I think that the benefits that will bring to people across this island would be amazing, because we look now, there's many services that people have to travel off this island for. Why are we not doing that in a collective way across the island right now? There's been amazing advances around cancer care, around children's cardiac care. So there's so many more opportunities that we could actually support people when they need the health service by just delivering a one Irish National Health Service across this island.
And really, in terms of public health service delivery, we'd be seriously playing catch up on many, many countries right across the globe where public medicine is delivered efficiently, it's properly resourced, and of course it's funded through a progressive taxation system. Those are big, big challenges, aren't they, Pearse? I mean, I don't see any of that actually happening. Like, from our cockpit is from Dublin, and we're looking at this state and how it works or how it doesn't work, and then you look to the north and you see all of the challenges there. I mean, it's my firm belief that we're not getting a fully functioning, fully funded, properly funded and resourced public health system on a partitioned island. That's my assessment of it.
It's never going to be efficient if it's on a partition basis, and both jurisdictions are forced into by a lot of good campaigning groups to actually deliver some services on an all Ireland basis, because it just makes so much sense. So we benefit here in Donegal from the fact that there is now a northwest radiotherapy centre in Atnagelvin for the entire Northwest. It's not for Derry, it's for the entire Northwest. That was the plan. And there's other models, which is cardiac care for children, and other models as well, where it can only happen on an all-Ireland basis, and that's what makes sense. So, there is some positives, if you want to take it that. First of all, there is a recognition across the political divide in the South that the system of healthcare that we have in the South isn't working. So there is a view that they've all signed up to sláinte care. Now, we would challenge Mary Lou in terms of what's their real intention, or are they delivering it fast enough? But at least they've bought into the idea, after long arguments, that we need to dismantle the two-tier public health system, and we need a proper public health system that's free at the point of delivery. But when you look at the figures, and my job, and from a finance spokesperson point of view, is looking at the figures. We actually spend more in the South per head of population than it does in the North. Yet we have a system that is very expensive, that doesn't work, that has huge delays in it, and does charge. It's not free compared to the NHS. So we do need to, in my view, this is an opportunity to create something that doesn't work properly in either side of the border. This is an opportunity to actually build something new, where there is universal support, regardless of your political ideology or your views. There is a view that we need to get health right, and it is broken. So Irish Unity creates that potential in a real meaningful way. And it's probably the best example where there is wastage in terms of the back-to-back development. Again, a good example of this is in terms of the COVID crisis. In terms of tracing of the infection across the border, we have systems that don't speak to each other, even when it comes to protecting human life in the middle of a pandemic. And that's just an example of it. But there's a huge amount of wastage because of the back-to-back development that can be eliminated and can be reinvested into then dealing with a proper national health service.
Conor, if partition has hurt the whole island, there is no doubt that it has particularly damaged the border corridor and the border regions. And I mean, you see that not just as now Minister for Finance, but as someone coming from where you do. I mean, you've grown up with this reality. You've seen the economic consequences directly for your own community and communities right along the border, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that very often in the discussion, or the lack of discussion sometimes, about reunification and economic development and the economic health of the island, there's kind of a nod to the border regions, a nod to the damage that's been done. But then the question arises, so what's the answer? What ultimately is the answer when you have, for example, Donegal, the natural hinterland for the city of Derry, so disrupted and cut off? I mean, it's a huge challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and the same situation applies. Newry and Dundalk were a natural region together before partition. And suddenly a line was drawn on a map, and we had back-to-back development. And you're right, there is a nod. Even the EU funding, the peace funding, was targeted at the border counties, and that provides some short-term fix. But I mean, when you're operating different taxation systems, two different currencies, some of these issues, particularly in relation to currency, are outside of the control of all of us. And why would you invest long-term in a business on one side of the border when currency differentials could change overnight? And your investment's lost. And somebody who operates, I mean, fuel was always the obvious one in terms of petrol stations. That somebody could open up a shack on one side of the border and be making a killing, and somebody invest millions of pounds in a purpose-built petrol station on the other side, and a currency change or taxation change overnight, their business is lost. So there's no opportunity for long-term planning. Even in that health discussion, I mean, Newry has gone through the angst around Daisy Hill Hospital. Dundalk went through the same around Louth Hospital, a natural hinterland for both, where a joined-up health service could have provided first-class service to all its citizens. Now the people of North Louth have to go to Drogheda or Dublin, and there's always been a question mark over Daisy Hill, and we fight tooth and nail every week to try and retain services there. And that's because of our proximity to the border. The catchment area for Daisy Hill ends about 4 miles south of it. even though there's a huge catchment area on the other side of that line in terms of Cooley Peninsula and North Louth. So this is all. This is the nonsense of the border, but it's also the everyday impact on people's lives, and it has been hugely problematic. Another example: the contact trace system doesn't recognise Southern mobile phones. I'm operating here, talking today from my office in Crossmaglen. Most of the people in this area have Southern mobile phones because that's where the signal comes from. But if they get COVID, they won't be contact traced because the northern system doesn't recognise Southern mobile numbers. Now, myself and Michelle and others have raised this in the executive meetings with the health department, but that's it. It's not even just the economic impact; it is having an impact on people's lives. And there have been great interventions to try and change that. Pearse and Michelle mentioned the Centre in Altnagelvin, the Cardiac Centre for Children in Dublin, the cross-border projects that COT run in terms of GP cover, and all of those things have all been helpful, undoubtedly helping and probably save people's lives, but they aren't undoing the long-term damage of this back-to-back system, and particularly communities that, like the one I represent here in South Armagh, experience that on a daily basis.
And it's yeah, sorry, Pearse, go on.
No, I was just going to say there, coming in on Conor's point, you can actually see that with all of the restrictions that Conor talks about there, and the North being was inside the British internal market, the restrictions, the currencies, the regulations difference in North and South, but that businesses actually want to trade north to south. That's the natural flow, and again, the document maps that out where. There are more businesses that trade from the north to south than do from the north to Britain. Despite all the restrictions there, that number of businesses there is increasing every year, that the number of exports from the north now are more than outside of Britain than to Britain. And that trajectory is continuing every single year. So that's the natural instinct for businesses there. And despite all the restrictions, they're overcoming some of them. What ending partition does, it unshackles those businesses. It takes away the shackles, it takes away the restrictions, it puts it into the European customs market again, it gets rid of the currency fluctuations, all of the different regulations, and it allows businesses to do what it should be doing, which is to be able to flow naturally, unimpeded by an artificial border and all the restrictions there. And that's very well documented in our document here, and it just shows you where people are and where people are going. And sometimes, businesses are way ahead of politicians and all that, and it's the conversations that we're having with them. Even those who don't believe in the idea of Irish unity, they want to know what it means. They're starting to see the benefits of all of that. So this is a discussion that we want to continue, and we want it being brought into all of those type of forums.
And of course, that the attitude of like business and the economy and investors and all of that is of course important, because they will look to and assess, the economy. And of course, we want enterprise, and we want good quality jobs and all of that. But we also want prosperity in people's homes and in people's pockets. And just for those of you that do access our document, Economic Benefits of a United Ireland, which is available on our website, I mean, the figures are really, really stark in terms of how we're doing as an island, from a high in Dublin to the southwest. Then you have Belfast featuring strongly enough, but Midwest, West, down, and the border regions really, really have suffered. There's no doubt. All of the data reflects that. There's no gainsaying it. Partition has been a disaster for the whole island, but particularly so for people living, working, and thinking about building businesses or investment in the border region. Michelle, you mentioned Brexit earlier, and I want to come back to that with you, because if partition is a real danger and a damaging reality for now on our island, certainly along comes Brexit. Despite the vote of people in the north to remain, Britain is Brexiting, and the protections that we achieved for the island were hard won, and no one knows that better than yourself. Of course, you've led the effort from the north with colleagues from across the party across the different parties to ensure that the North is protected, to mitigate the damages against the Tory Brexit. But there's no doubt that Brexit makes the border not just our problem, but Europe's problem, doesn't it? And it has advanced that consideration of reunification and economic, the economic piece of that as well.
Yeah, I think Brexit demonstrates in the clearest way you possibly can that the British government will always take and make decisions based on what's in their interests, not what is in Irish interests. And Brexit is, as I said, the clearest example of that. I think that, just back to the previous conversation, I mean, we know the damage that Brexit brings to the all-island economy, and particularly for those businesses in the border corridor that both Pearse and Conor have just spoken about. So I think that Brexit is the case in point as to why we need to take this into our own hands and actually change things for the better to make sure that this never happens again. But you make the point, Mary Lou, very well, that this nearly becomes in a post-Brexit scenario, and it appears that there's going to be deal or no deal decision time next week at some stage. But even if there is a deal achieved, it'll be a threadbare deal, and it'll cause detriment, I believe, to the economy. And even though we have secured the protocol and the protections in the protocol, they mitigate the damage of Brexit. It's not an all singing, all dancing. It's not the answer. The ideal answer here is Irish unity. And I think very much we will look very much towards Europe, because they have made the declaration that says that in the event of a successful unity referendum, that the whole of the island then becomes the full island member state. And I think that is the key question for many people now. Which union do you wish to be part of? So it very much, the Irish unity piece becomes right in the centre of the wider debate around, do you value European citizenship? So I think that for us, certainly we will, as our own political party, will be going to Europe. We'll be speaking to the European leaders. We will be asking for their support. I'm glad that they have actually been both politically and financially supportive to Ireland throughout the peace process. And we'll ask them to obviously to work with us in the time ahead as we plan for Irish unity. And I think they will have a big role to play in actually supporting us whenever that comes about. So the fact they have led that declaration bearer for all to see, that in the event of unity referendum we will all be back into Europe, then I think that is a big question on a lot of people's minds. Not necessarily just, I mean, we are convinced of the merits, we are United Irelanders, but for those that are not at this point, this may be a game changer for them in terms of making up their mind around what's in their best interest.
And of course, there's precedent at a European level for the encouragement of reunification projects. And again, our document makes reference to the German experience. Now, obviously, we're not Germany, so we're not trying to argue an exact parallel. But there is a precedent there, Conor, isn't there, for Europe to take a very front-footed and a positive approach to a reunification project, and we'll be looking to colleagues across the continent to take an interest and ultimately to become convinced of the merits of Irish reunification from a European perspective, and to support us all. And by us, I mean all of us who live on this island in that effort.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in the first instance, Europe looks on Ireland as a very successful conflict resolution process, and they draw strength from that, because the issue of borders and contested borders is something that's going to go on across the world for some time to come. And they have looked to us in recent, and they have, as Michelle has said, provided support, and they were very targeted and very knowledgeable in terms of the levels of support and the interventions that we needed, and very keen to see us assisted in emerging from conflict and moving into a more stable and democratic society. And clearly, the whole Brexit experience, when you look at the energy that's been tied up on the issue of the Irish border between the whole European machinery of government and the British government, I mean, it is the issue that has dominated what should have been, from Britain's point of view, not ours because we voted to stay, but from Britain's point of view, a straightforward exiting process, even though that is complex in itself. But the issue of the Irish border has made that infinitely more complex and politically charged than it needed to be. And that's going to continue even as Michelle says, even if there is a deal struck next week, the issue of the Irish border and goods coming back and forth across the Irish Sea, goods coming from that are manufactured in the northern side, whose land bridges through the Dublin port and on into Britain and perhaps into Europe, then that complexity and that political damage and economic damage that does is going to be a factor until such times as the issue of the borders is addressed. So it is in Europe's interests. It's obviously in our interests, and that's why we're advancing the arguments. Arguably, it's in Britain's interest too, although they view us in terms of Scotland and of Wales and of the breakup of the United Kingdom. But I mean, clearly, I think it is in Europe's interest to see this issue addressed and addressed peacefully and through a democratic process, which is how we're trying to advance it.
And Pearse, at the core of this document, just finally and briefly, is that whole drive for the green economy, you know, for green renewables and the opportunity, as we see it, that you know, that a reunified Ireland and one of the benefits of reunification being, you know, a real chance to drive that green economic model.
Yeah, and again, it touches on the idea of trying to get to zero carbon emissions, you know, within a certain time frame. That to do that, you could have two different strategies. You could have two competing different strategies for private investment. In the north, as Conor mentioned, there isn't fiscal levers. There is no ability to raise debt to borrow from the markets, which is required to make the type of investment that you need to make to have that type of transition. And not just a transition, but a just transition, and to exploit the opportunities that come with that. So that's not possible in the context of a partitioned island. So again, what this does is unlocks the potential of having a joined up green agenda where we can invest in the areas that need to be invested in. And some of that investment is quite expensive in its initial investment, but it obviously pays off. So this document talks very much, Mary Lou, about and builds on studies that are done about, you know, when decisions are removed from the people, the decisions have a negative impact. You know, on Thursday we'll be in dealing with the finance bill again. Every year we deal with taxation changes across all taxation measures. Maybe 100-page piece of legislation debated for about 5 days in total, because the levers of fiscal levers exist in the north and in the south, and some of those decisions are very, very focused on certain cities in the south. The north can't do that because the fiscal powers aren't there. So we need to unlock that potential. It will unlock the potential for the green economy and way beyond that as well. And I would really encourage people to look at this document, and it is a discussion document. It's not a case that we have all the answers. It's not a case that we're wishing away any of the challenges. There are challenges, but what the document shows is when you actually weigh all of them up, this is huge opportunities for us, as has been discussed this evening.
And that's it in a nutshell, isn't it, Michelle, that we have to empower ourselves. We need to empower our island, our people, our economy. That's ultimately what the Unity Project is about, isn't it? It's about not losing things. It's about additionality and progress. And certainly you see it at first hand, Michelle, day in and day out, in government, in the executive, just the limitations that we currently live with because our island is partitioned. And I'm sure you also see the vast potential for everyone, as you said earlier, in reunification and a strong economy underpinning a unified Ireland.
Yeah, we've touched this evening on a number of issues: the health service, the fact that Brexit's being foisted upon us, the challenges for the business community. So across every part of our lives, partition is impacting on us. So there's an opportunity in all of this, I think, for something better. Conor and I will tell you, we be frustrated in the executive all the time because we don't have the ability to do what Pearse just talked about, because we have limited fiscal powers in the Assembly. So as a devolved Assembly, for our part in it, we do our best to try to serve people well. Whenever Sinn Féin has a department we put people first. You know, we work very, very hard to support those that need it, to support workers, to support families. We're doing our very, very best, but it is in a very challenged situation because of the nature of politics in the north. So 5 parties around the executive table, which is right, because that goes right to the heart of the Good Friday Agreement and power sharing. So we're there because we believe in it. But I do think that the limitations are being exposed, whether that be via Brexit, via the response to the COVID crisis. It has not been as all island and in terms of approach as it should be. So I think that all those things are just exposing partition for what it is, and not as a failure. So what we want to do, and what our document is doing, is to try to offer up, to challenge the myths, to bust those myths, but also to offer up the potential. And what we're asking for people to do is get a look at it, talk about it at home, talk about it at your workplace, talk about it, because the conversation now is front and center, and this is all moving in only one direction. And I think for us as Republicans, it's a time to be generous, to be open, and to have the conversation around the potential that there is for all of us, or those of us with an Irish identity, those of us with a British identity, and make sure that we have that inclusive conversation about planning for something that's in our collective interests.
And we'll finish on that note, because this is the time to be open, to be generous, and it's a time to be ambitious too, because we know that there are, so many aspects of life, north and south, so many things that fall short, so many things that haven't worked. And we have before us an opportunity to reset the dial and to really build something new and inclusive, island-wide systems, and an economy that serves our people really, really well, and that underpins not just corporate prosperity, but community prosperity, family prosperity, decent work, good jobs, good income levels. Everyone who lives on this island should expect those things to be available to them. It shouldn't be a luxury for a minority of people who call this island home. So thank you, Michelle and Pearse and Conor, for this chat. And can I just remind you to be part of this conversation, read our document. As I said, it's online, and keep in touch, because we are in a decade of change, a decade of opportunity, the decade in which we will face into a referendum on Irish unity, and which we hope and plan to grab with both hands to make our island, your Ireland, our Ireland, a better place for all of us to live, to work, to raise our families, and to grow old in. So, Guramayaguv, Arish, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.